Welcome, everybody. Welcome to 2021. It's great to have you with us. Thanks so much for making some time today. Hello, Cameron. Good to have you here. Can you believe we made it? We all survived last year. So very much excited, looking forward to the year. We've got loads planned, and the user group will obviously be a key component of that exercise. So our focus today is the Eloqua Form design editor. And so we're quite a bit prepared. Hopefully it's of interest. And as is usually the case, please make sure you ask some questions as we go through. My name is Derek Bell. I'm your host today and Director of Customer Success and Marketing at Marketing Cube. On the line with me to help with Q&A and with chat, we've got Matt Hemsley, our Marketing Manager. And I was going to say Matt's normally based in Sydney, but he was in Melbourne during lockdown. He was literally locked down in Melbourne. He came back and has gone back to Melbourne, and hopefully we'll see him in Sydney at some point. But I think the one thing we learned through 2020 was working remote really does work. So good to have you with us, Matt, wherever you may be. Jason is based in Sydney, and Jason's one of our account directors, and Jason will also be helping with Q&A. Okay, first thing we want to do is always dive into questions. So when customers register for the user group, we invite them to submit a question. So we had two today. It's a bit of a slow start to the year. We normally get a few more, but that's okay. So first one was from Lisa in Sydney. And Lisa asked around converting form data into Eloqua dashboard reports, specifically via custom objects with a question mark. So Lisa, the ability to create dashboards in Insight is obviously something you can do. It's the Insight dashboards that you can manipulate, not so much the standard dashboards contained within Eloqua itself. So yes, looking at Insight is where we would create those dashboards. Now, there are some various ways you can do it. So typically when we work with most clients, they would come to us with some sort of a brief as to kind of what they're wanting to be able to see. We then provide some direction as to how that could be enhanced or what's possible, etc. Or maybe haven't thought about certain things, so we can add some direction there to that as well. But there are some things you can do to kickstart the process yourself, and that would look a little bit like this. So in the Help Center, you'll find under, where are we? Under Analytics. So go under Explore and then down to Analytics. And there's actually a tutorial you can go through creating a dashboard firsthand, I suppose, and so going through that process. And the key thing that you will need is you will need to be an analyzer user within Insight. So Insight has two levels. The standard license everybody has access to, so any Eloqua user, when they click on Insight, is able to then access Insight. It's the analyzer license though, which doesn't cost anything, by the way. It's just an additional set of access privileges that you need to be assigned to from your Oracle or Eloqua administrator. It only takes a couple of minutes to do. It's very simple. And then once that's been assigned, you're then able to go through this process, specifically with this particular tutorial to walk you through how to do that. Now, the key thing to understand about reporting on forms especially is that every form is unique. And so because every form is unique, the reporting that you will get through Insight largely would be focused on a specific form. So a scenario might be that with the dashboard, that one of the first filters you would apply would actually be a form, so that you have to select a particular form and then present the data from that particular form. Now, the building of these particular dashboards is not my forte. That's where our support team come in. They're the geniuses that understand how to do that and to make that happen. So look, I'd encourage you, Lisa, have a crack at the tutorial that you can see contained within the Help Center. And then from there, if you get stuck, please come and let us know, ask any questions, and we'd be happy to help with that one. All right, and next question is from Sebastian in the US. He says, I don't understand hidden form fields for tracking. Can you please explain how that works? Okay, well, Sebastian, we actually did an entire user group last year around attribution that covered all the sort of key points of how to set up various attribution models, and hidden fields was a part of that exercise as well. So what I will do is try and recall, maybe Matt, I don't know if you could help me. Matt, if you could have a look at the, I want to say it was maybe around June or July last year. It'll be on the blog. If you could help me with that one, Matt, that'd be great. I'll let everybody know so they can locate that. But essentially, a hidden field is, as it sounds, it's a field that's obviously not visible to a person when they access the form, wherever the form may be. But often the hidden field is used to either capture information from URLs. And so from a tracking point of view, that's how that works. And we'll talk about this a little bit later. I'll show you a couple of forms that have the hidden fields and sort of explain how they work and what they're doing. But you can also hardwire information into hidden fields that you then want every single form submission. So anybody that submits a particular form, if you want to have a particular and set value stamped to that particular contact in Eloqua, well, you could use a hidden field to do that. One of the more common ones is the Campaign ID from a CRM platform. So if you've got a Campaign ID that you want to make sure that every single form submission from that particular campaign is captured, well, you could use that. So hidden fields have a wide list of, or a wide variety of things that you can play with, and they can help add value. They're great from a reporting point of view. They enhance what you've got. And in fact, I've got something to show you in just a moment, which will show you how we use hidden fields and the type of data that you can capture from that. Alrighty, so let's jump into the agenda for today. So what we want to try and do this year is have an introduction, and the introduction largely will be to show you a little bit of attribution information, and we'll get to that in just a moment. We'll then jump into Forms 101 and sort of get a high-level understanding of what those forms are. Then our top 5 tips. We'll also look at some examples of slightly more complex forms potentially, and then also look at the 21A release information, which is due mid-February. So you'll see that information. So let's jump in. Now, I don't know if you recall, but for those who attend regularly, you'll know that we always have some sort of a nice image here in the background. So this year, I've decided to be a little bit more proactive in doing what we can to support tourism. Why not, right? So for those in Australia, you'll be fairly familiar with this, this shot. This is the Gold Coast on Queensland. And the Gold Coast is kind of, maybe for our North American friends and European friends, is a little bit like Florida. It's a long stretch of beach, as you can see. And you may not believe it, but you can actually get to that beach and sometimes be the only person when you're looking left or right. Sometimes it can be quite amazing. Alrighty, so attribution. So what we've done here, we've got the form that you use to register for this particular event, and we have a number of emails captured. So what we're trying to do is understand which particular email drove the greatest amount of conversions. And you'll see that those emails are broken into 2 groups. There are those customers of Marketing Cube that we communicate with regularly. And then there are also prospects for those of you who may not be using Marketing Cube for services, etc., but you are an Eloqua customer. And thank you again for joining us. So what you can see from here, and this is pulled directly from the form, is which of the emails actually converted. So we have a configuration set up, and it's actually a reasonably standard configuration within Eloqua. And it pulls the lead source information. I'm going to say lead source because there's lead source, lead medium, and lead campaign, I think it is. So, but we can see the first email, which goes to customers, drove 63% of the conversions. Now with customers, we send one of 2 second emails. If they didn't open the first one, they get email 002A that you can see on the screen there. If they did open the first one but didn't register, then we send them 002B. And then the 12 and 6% are the 2 separate emails or 2 invitations that we send to those who are not customers of Marketing Cube. And so yeah, it just enables you to see how effective that is. You can see that obviously by sending a second email to people to invite them to attend something clearly works. I've looked at this information, not always shared it with you, but I look at this information most months and it's reasonably consistent. There was a flurry of registrations this morning as well, so they're not actually reflected in this particular graph, but it could be any one of those emails that those people clicked on. So that's a little bit about attribution and just one example of how that information can be helpful. So we'll show you that each month, and maybe that's slightly different data because we we do ask different questions when you register. So we'll share different information with you as we go through. Alrighty, let's jump in and look at Eloqua Forms 101. So again, beautiful shots of Australia, a little bit of Tasmania here for you. So if you've not been to Tasmania, it's certainly worthwhile making some time to get down there. If you're from overseas, obviously it's a longer trip, but for Australians, it's not too far at all, and it is pretty gorgeous. I've got to ask a question. I almost wanted to do this as a poll, but does anybody know who actually said this? Feel free to use the chat, and beware, my question is a little bit loaded. But the reason I thought this was a perfect quote is that sometimes we can just keep doing the same thing again and again. In other words, we use the same form again and again. Okay, so Ben, you say Einstein, and Ben, 24 hours ago, I would have said exactly the same thing. But a little bit of Googling tells me that Einstein never actually said this. He's somehow been attributed to the author of this particular quote. Who actually said it? I can't find out. So any of the sites that seem to tell you that he didn't say it aren't able to disclose who. So just a bit of general FYI for you. The key thing I see sometimes with forms is that we just simply use the same form again and again and again. Now, if we're using some progressive profiling, that's not necessarily a bad thing, because the form is in fact different for the user each time they reach that particular page. But if we're simply using first name, last name, email, and company and moving on, and there's no hidden fields and there's no additional questions or at least some progressive profiling, then we're just kind of doing the same thing over and over again, but we're not going to get a different result. So what I want to try and show you today is a little bit more about forms, help you understand the basics of how they function, and then give you some tips on how you can potentially improve your use of forms. And certainly around lead capture being a key aspect of forms is one of the things we want to focus on. So how do you learn about your prospects? Well, I suppose there are all sorts of ways you learn about them, but for digital marketing, one of the key ways we learn about them is through the information they actually disclose to us. So that comes down to asking the right sort of questions so that we can uncover and discover the right sort of information that's going to help us build better campaigns, help us understand their business problems or their issues that they're having. From a higher education point of view, it could be around trying to capture learning preferences, course ideas, career goals, all those sorts of things, all those some soft points, but also some hard points, like are you looking to study this year or next year, this semester, next semester, that sort of stuff. Did they graduate high school? Have they previously studied in higher education? If so, what did they study? All those sorts of things can be captured slowly over time. And usually during things like nurturing campaigns is when you've got the opportunity to ask those different questions. So there are all sorts of information that people, and it will largely depend on your audience, there's all sorts of information that people can provide you. And depending on who you are, as in your company and your brand or your organization, then that will determine the types of questions that you can ask and people's, I suppose, their readiness to actually want to answer some of those questions. So you might start fairly high and sort of general, sometimes offering people responses from a single select pick list is a little bit more desirable. It's often easier on a smartphone, for instance, to use that function versus then having to type in a response. The typed responses and written responses are certainly helpful, but they're largely useless from an automation point of view. So those written responses, as long as you've got somebody who's actually going to be reading and understanding and comprehending what that person has told you through their written response, well, that's fantastic. But if you're trying to drive automation from the information that you're capturing, you want to stay away from free text fields as much as possible, because there's very little you can actually do with them. I can see Matt has also dropped into the chat function there, guys. You'll see it was the June 2020 user group that talks all about attribution. So please jump in and have a look at that. So if we're looking at forms in the context of lead capture and lead management, then there are a lot of things that you can do to really enhance campaigns that you're doing that might actually start life outside of Eloqua, But through those campaigns, you might be driving people to specific landing pages that contain a form. And there's every reason why that particular form should be an Eloqua form. So if you're running a targeted ad campaign, and that could be something on LinkedIn, it could be something general through Google, Google Ads, for instance. It could even be, I mean, we're very familiar, certainly in Australia at the moment now, with QR codes have sort of had a bit of a resurgence in popularity. In Australia now, we pretty much have to scan a QR code as soon as we walk into any business, establishment, government department, restaurant, anything. We need to register that we were there, essentially, from a COVID point of view. So the QR code is a great way to, people are very familiar now with them, or more familiar than they used to be. So if you're doing a very targeted ad campaign, create a very targeted form to match. Don't spend all that money to drive people to that particular advertisement, then to have them arrive at a form where we disregard all of the information that we could have available to us. So make sure the form suits, make sure the form is asking the right sort of questions that suit the ad. And obviously we're garnering and capturing the responses that will help us close more deals and understand more about people, give more information to the sales team or whoever will be processing those particular leads. Now, progressive profiling is something that you experience every month when you register for the user group. But as I often bemoan, I feel like I'm running out of questions to ask for user group members. I'm at a point now where I should be asking what your favorite color is. Don't know what I'm going to do with that information, but progressive profiling is a part of that form every month. So you'll notice that or you may or may not notice that it does change slightly from month to month, but that's driven through progressive profiling. Now, the hidden fields in the form are really critical. So if you want to be in a position to gauge the effectiveness of a particular campaign that you've run, especially a paid campaign, maybe there's paid advertising, as in the first bullet point, then you want to make sure that those leads are stamped and will show as a conversion from that particular campaign, which then falls into the next bullet point, which is looking at campaign IDs. So if you, and it's usually a CRM platform, that you would have some sort of overarching campaign ID that you wanted to tie all those conversions to. Well, you can hardwire that campaign ID into the particular form that people are being driven to. So that will then, from a reporting point of view, which kind of goes back a little bit to Lisa's question at the start of the session, that campaign ID will help create all the links for you, bring everything together. On the campaign canvas, you may also go to the extent of adding things like total cost of the campaign. That can often be done in Eloqua or in the CRM, or it can synchronize between the both or between the two, which then gives you much better reporting as well. Forms are a great way to really maximize your lead campaigns, and especially the attribution and also the dollars. From a logistic point of view, sometimes people will think, well, yeah, but my Eloqua form is a bit ugly and it doesn't look as nice than the one we have on the website, etc. That's fine too. I disagree with you on the ugly, but that's okay. On the website, if you've created a landing page for some reason that's not an Eloqua landing page, you can still do what we call a repost. So when people submit that form, wherever it may be, then you can put some code behind that website, which will then send that data directly into Eloqua. The upside of using Eloqua landing pages, so an Eloqua form on an Eloqua landing page, is that you can personalize that experience so much more. Things like progressive profiling can be done when you have an Eloqua form sitting on an Eloqua landing page. You're really in a much better position to personalize that experience if you use your Eloqua assets versus using your CMS to simply capture form data and push it into an Eloqua form to get it into the system. So something for you to think about there. Now, what I want to try and do, because this is Forms 101, is try and explain the flow of the data. Because if you understand the flow of the data, then you begin to understand the possibilities, I think, that will help you build smarter forms. So what I'm going to show you right now is reasonably generic in the way that it's set up, but most of you will probably have something in place just like this. If it's not just like this, that's fine too. We can still tailor things to suit as needed. Okay, so there's a question here from Lisa. Hello, Lisa. What QR add-ons do you use with Eloqua to divert a landing page to divert to a landing page and form. So Lisa, there are some, I believe, apps available, but essentially you don't, I mean, you can just use Google to create a QR code these days. So what I would do is create my landing page with my form, take that URL and simply create a QR code based on the URL. So then if I wanted to put, and we used to do this years ago in relation to brochures, so like physical brochures, if we're at a trade show of some sort, then on the back of the brochure, we had a QR code, and that QR code, when people clicked on it, took them to a specific Eloqua landing page. So we're able to build in the attribution into that URL so that when people scan the QR code and reach that form, then the form would pull in information as in, you know, XYZ brochure. If I wanted to be really specific by trade show, I'd need to create a separate QR code for each trade show, which is unreasonable, I suppose, but that would certainly help you achieve that. There's nothing overly special from a QR code point of view. Hopefully that answers your question. All right, so let's have a look. Need to put your geek hat on right now, if that's okay. So CRM, in the CRM, we have contacts and leads. Some of you don't use leads, some of you just use contacts, but in most CRM platforms, you'll see a contact construct and a lead construct. And very generically speaking, you're going to have fields on that contact and lead, like company name, first name, last name, email address, job title, job category, and state, for example. Now, if we take that information over to Eloqua and to the Eloqua contact, generally it's a mirror. It's exactly the same. So we synchronize that information backwards and forwards. Now, how you choose to route that can differ for everybody. In some cases, it may be an absolute synchronization. So CRM updates, Eloqua updates, or if Eloqua is updated, then the CRM is updated. Company name typically is one that is not. So often the CRM, well, our best practice suggestion is that really it's the CRM that should be the source of truth in relation to company name. So at some point when the person first comes into your system, if they happen to come in through a form, yes, you'll capture their company name that first time, but pretty much that becomes the source of truth. So understanding that you can control the source of truth through the integration at a field level. Now, there are also fields that you're going to have in the CRM that are really of no value to you as marketers from an Eloqua point of view. They don't really help you segment the data any better. You're not going to use them from a field merge point of view. Therefore, they don't need to come into Eloqua. And so fields may be more of a system type field in the CRM last modified by. That's great. It can stay in the CRM. It's not adding any value to me as a marketer. I don't really need it in Eloqua. All right, so now let's consider that it's time for you to create a campaign, and in that campaign you need a form. This is obviously a very shortened form for the purposes of the illustration, and that form may contain a whole range of different fields, and you'll notice that we may often ask the very standard ones: company name, first name, last name, email address. From a technical point of view, just as a general FYI, the only field that you must have on an Eloqua form is the email address. So an absolute bare minimum, if you want people to submit a form for whatever reason, but not ask them anything, but you still need to identify them, email address is actually the only required field that you must have on an Eloqua form. All right, so the person submits the form, that information would then go into Eloqua. Now, if that person's already there, it simply gets updated. However, if they don't exist in Eloqua, then Eloqua will create them as a result of the form processing steps that you create. Now, in the context of your campaign, so again, very specifically in the context of your campaign, you may want to ask a few additional questions. Now, it may not be job title, job category, or state, so that's fine. We don't want those in this particular campaign. Maybe you want to ask things like a person's favorite color or their preferred smartphone. You can tell I spent hours thinking of these questions, but they're not really anything that's going to add value specifically to the Eloqua contact. So we don't need them on the contact. They'll live forever simply in the form. The other one you might want to ask is dietary requirements. Perhaps it's an event that you're running. And so, but dietary requirements, that is interesting. Okay, we want to hold on to that information and we want to store that against their contact, because it would be nice the next time they register for an event where we may need to ask them dietary requirements, that if they're vegan or lactose intolerant or whatever that case may be, that information could actually pre-populate into the form. So they don't have to tell you again. I already told you that 3 months ago. Do I have to tell you again? So that can be a nice way to use that particular data. But from a CRM point of view, there's really no need. The sales team don't really need to know that Jenny Smith or James Brown are lactose intolerant. That's really doesn't really matter. It doesn't add any real value to the CRM database, but it's good information for Eloqua to hold on to. So what we've tried to do here is just give you some examples of how data can flow backwards and forwards, and where the source of truth is, and where you can potentially ask just very campaign specific questions like favorite color, preferred smartphone, and those responses can just live simply in the form, in which case you would probably then export them to Excel. An example is, for instance, if you're having people register potentially for an event, regardless of face-to-face or in person, sorry, face-to-face or online, you might want to ask people at the point of registering, would they like to submit a question to the keynote speaker, for example? So great to be able to offer people that option. Their response is obviously required, or not required, but is great to have, and you'll be able to capture and hold that in the form. But that data doesn't need to go anywhere beyond the form. There's really no field on the contact that it would make sense to drop it into, because it's very campaign specific, in this case, very event specific. But you want to be able to have that information and then obviously export it to Excel, make sure it gets to the speaker or whoever's hosting the event. So this is one example where not all information captured in the form necessarily needs to be pushed through to Eloqua, or in fact to the CRM. There's a question here from Joel. Is there an easy way to add hyperlink for privacy terms and conditions in the form? So Joel, yes and no. I noticed you've obviously spotted in that screenshot, we have a hyperlink there for privacy policy. Look, when we get into Eloqua, let me show you. So I need to tell you that is a little bit of JavaScript, magic happening there. But the thing is, once it's set up, it's done and you don't need to touch it. So I'll show you exactly what that looks like. And if I forget, please prompt me before we finish, Matt, and Jason, if you could help, that would be great. So here's a form with a few more questions, essentially. But the smarter the questions are we can ask, the better the quality of the leads that we can capture. It's easy as marketers to sort of maybe sit in our little ivory towers from time to time and work out what we believe is the most important. But I can't encourage you enough to make sure you have that discussion with sales. The benefit of asking all these different questions needs to drive a purpose, okay? It needs to be able to ensure that it makes sense and is adding value to the sales team, so that the sales team can take that information. In the context of an event, the types of questions that you ask, you probably want to make sure they're closely aligned to the event. Don't miss that opportunity to capture a little bit more information about somebody and their level of interest, or understanding where they are in their buying cycle, or again, if they're prospective students, what's going on in their world, etc. All that sort of stuff. Simply delivering the same form again and again with email address, first name, last name, and organization or company name is just a lost opportunity. So let's jump in, and I'll show you in Eloqua a couple of these different areas that we've just talked about. Okay, so this is I'm going to come back to this form and show you a few different things as well. Let me just zoom in so that might be a little bit easier for you to see. So let's answer Joel's question first. Okay, Joel, so you can see here, what we've got is that particular function right there is what you're seeing. Did I have a page open? Here we go. Okay, so the form that's just about to appear right here on the screen, which is, there we go. That's what this is right here. So you can see I agree to opt into communications, but you'll notice actually in Eloqua, when you and I look at the form, which is here, there's none of that extra information. Okay, so how do we do that? I can provide you with high-level direction, but I would need to connect you with our support team to make this happen. So essentially, we've got some HTML here. You can have this say Mickey Mouse or Donald Duck. It doesn't really matter, but it makes more sense to say what it is. In this case, it's global opt-in. So now whenever I take any of our forms and place those onto one of our Eloqua landing page templates, there's also some JavaScript sitting in there. And so the HTML name of the form, along with the JavaScript that is sitting in our landing pages, they combine and work together to then produce that experience that you're seeing right there. And so it's actually referencing in the JavaScript. That's where we're able to then have a click or a link that would take people off to the privacy policy as well. So that's how it's done. And the thing is, it's done once, like, I don't know, we did this years ago, and we've not touched it since. So it's just there. It always happens. Every single form that we produce has that exact same information on it. Okay, so that was that question. Then we talked about progressive profiling. So progressive profiling gives you the flexibility to present multiple questions and control how many of those questions you might ask at any particular time. So you can randomize the fields. You can be smart and only display empty fields. So if we already know which city you work from, we're not going to ask you that question again. Sometimes, like for instance, you might say, well, why would I want to display a field that I already had the response to? Sometimes if you're wanting to validate information, job title is probably a good example, right? So people's careers move on, they do different things, job titles can change. And so sometimes presenting people with that information can be helpful. Then we want to look at hidden fields. So all of this information that you can see down the bottom here, and notice they're all actually field merges as well. So let me take an example that everybody's most interested in is down here at the lead source, campaign, and medium. So these three particular fields populate via a field merge, and we've created a field merge. It's a very specific type of field merge that pulls information in from a URL. So for instance, looking back here at our website, if anybody, and actually I don't think anybody did this month, if you were to come to our website and click on the Register Now link, if I just hover over it, yeah, you can't really see it, but in the bottom of the screen, there's a very long URL, which is just the standard Eloqua URL for the landing page. But then you'll see the UTM source, UTM medium, and UTM campaign. So when I click on that, you might be able to see it up here a little bit easier. I can't really zoom in on that. It only increases the page, but you kind of get, it's everything after the question mark, essentially. And so when you submit this particular form, that form via those three fields that we talked about. So Sebastian, this comes back to your question earlier in the session today. What happens is those values, which is our website, organic, and then the Eloqua user group, that information automatically pulls through into, pulls into these three fields right here. And so that information is then captured. So if I go to the user group, this one here. So this is the actual form that you completed this month for the January user group. And so again, there's those three fields at the bottom, hidden fields at the bottom of the form. If I look at the submission data and scroll all the way over, here we go. Lead source, lead campaign, and lead medium. You remember how I showed you that graph that showed you which email was the highest performing one? So you can see here we number the emails. So the lead campaign, what we've done is we've configured this to automatically pull the name of the email. It could pull the name of the campaign, but then I don't get the granularity. And I think the granularity is really quite cool, right? Because that enables me to see, well, you know, email number 6 was absolutely useless because nobody registered as a result of getting the 6th email, but emails 1, 3, and 5 were absolute winners. So it just helps you analyze that and analyze reasonably easily too, which is good. Lead source, this particular month, everything was Eloqua. And in this case, the medium was email in every single case. So nobody's gone, what that's telling me is nobody's gone to the website to find the user group and to click through and register from there. And that's okay too. People do from time to time. Jared has a question. Hi, Jared. Do you have a preference on using hidden fields versus adding a step in form processing for your lead source stamping? Does it make a difference? Yeah, great question, Jared. I was actually just talking with Thomas, one of our geniuses, this morning on this one. Essentially the same question. So what Jared is asking is, we can put this information here, or we can use processing steps here at the back and potentially look at update contacts with custom values. I'll add that now. What that enables you to do is find a contact field that you want. And so probably what Jared is suggesting is we would go to something like lead source, for instance, select the update. You can append, apply a date stamp, override it, or set to a value. And set to value is the one most people would do. And then here you would put a lead source of, well, you could put the, well, okay, so here's why I don't do it, Jared, in this particular example. The beauty of doing it as a hidden field is that it's dynamic, and Eloqua is able to know which email the person's clicked on in order to reach the page. And for me, that's really quite valuable information in the context of this campaign. So that's one reason why I wouldn't do it here, and I would use the hidden field to do it. The other nice thing about doing it on a hidden field is you also then have that sitting as submission data. So if you think through the exercise to insight reporting and all that other types of reporting that you may want to do, the fact that you've got that information captured here in the form submission data means that you can report on it. However, if you're using the processing steps in order to do it, then you can't report on that, or it's more complex to report on is probably the easier response. But Jared, hopefully that answers your question. But a great question, by the way. I don't think it's always a binary exercise. If it has to be this or this, it really depends on the campaign and kind of what you're doing and what your expectations are or needs are from a reporting point of view. If you do have any more questions, and thanks, love the questions, so please feel free to keep those questions coming through. Okay, Joel, hang on a minute. Joel asked a very valid question. Jared wants to know, sorry, Joel wants to know, how does the value from the URL, so how do these values up here get passed into the form? So when you create a field merge, there's multiple ways that you can do it. Okay, so it's referred to as a query string. Now, there are a few bits and pieces and moving parts that you need to kind of connect and get happening at the same time. But once you've got them all set up, it just simply works every single time. But if you go back in that chat that we put in a little bit earlier, where was it? There, it's in the chat. There's a link there that will go through that in quite a bit of detail and explain how you go about doing that. Setting up the Eloqua piece is probably not the hardest part of the exercise. The hardest part of the exercise, I think, is agreeing as an organization what your attribution model is going to be, and then how you actually make that attribution model come to life using Eloqua. So there would be different ways you would configure Eloqua in order to make that happen for you. All right, let's go back to our top 5 tips. So what I tried to do here was to think about some of the 5 key things that if you actioned would put you in a much better position than perhaps you're in today. And while we're on it, a little photograph of South Australia. So gorgeous coastline across South Australia. I spent my Christmas in Adelaide, the capital city of South Australia. Had a lovely time over there. Nice to be home, but yeah, gorgeous place to visit. If you're into wine and food, South Australia is your destination. Okay, so the key point I made earlier was that what we really want to try and do is avoid asking the same questions again and again. So create and use form templates would be my #1 top tip. So forms can be complex, and they can be complex because they can do so many amazing things. In order for you to really maximize and take advantage of that rich level of functionality, though, what you want to do is create templates. And I promise you, we use templates at Marketing Cube. I it's really rare that I can't even think the last time I actually created a form from scratch. Even if I wanted to create a form that's slightly different, I would go to my templates and I would choose a template that has most of the steps in it that I want for this obscure campaign that I might be doing. So it's very, very rare that I would actually start from scratch with a blank form. So that'd be the first alarm bell for you. If it's come time for you to create a form and you're doing it from scratch, that's the first alarm bell. So create templates. They make things easier. They're far more consistent, and you won't forget and miss things. So that's the first tip. Second tip, and this comes back to that crazy illustration that I had a little bit earlier, was to understand your CRM and source data model. If you understand the relationship of the data from your CRM or your source system, may even be an ERP system or a student management system of some sort, whatever that information is, as it flows into Eloqua, you need to understand the relationship of that data. That will impact the types of questions you ask, the way you ask them, but also really control from a form processing point of view, how you process that data. So a really important part of that exercise, understand the CRM or your source data model. And always consider progressive profiling. In fact, I'd almost say maybe the question needs to be, okay, we've created a form. Why haven't we included progressive profiling? Why won't we use progressive profiling? It's a lost opportunity when you're driving people to a form to not ask potentially just one more question, and be smart about the question you ask, because progressive profiling will know if you know the answer already. So it can help you deliver a much better experience from that point of view. Hidden fields. So we've touched on hidden fields a few different times here already this morning. Hidden fields are incredibly valuable in helping you really get a better picture of the overall data quality. It really helps you, especially from an attribution point of view, that's absolutely clear. One of the other big reasons I love using hidden fields is we want to be able to inform our sales team of when their contacts or contact that they own has actually submitted a form. In fact, we've got a couple of minutes. I may just show you quickly how we do that. But the critical thing for you to be able to do that is Eloqua needs to know on every single contact who the salesperson is. Now, that's not as hard as it sounds, because if your CRM is integrated, that information is already sitting there in the CRM. There's a user who owns a contact or a lead. We can bring that information into Eloqua in a heartbeat through the integration, and I'll show you what that looks like here in just a minute. And my fifth suggestion is around the capturing consent and the opt-in. And I think it was Joel who asked that question earlier. And so that's where you see any of Marketing Cube's forms. This is, as I said, there's a little bit of JavaScript and HTML magic that's being done, but that's all, as I said, we haven't touched it in years. It just simply works. It's there, it's built into all of our templates. I don't have to add anything. I don't even have to think about it. It just happens, because that capturing of the consent, certainly if we look at our friends in Europe with GDPR legislation, certainly in Australia there and New Zealand, there are reasonably strict laws about this whole opt-in and more specifically the opt-out process as well. So the better you can be about capturing that and having consistency across the board, the better off you're going to be for everybody. All right, before we go on to the next one, as in some examples, let me just quickly show you that hidden field, so the user group. And let me just join the dots so you can, oops. Okay, so we have a look at my contact in Eloqua. There's a system field that you're probably familiar with, referred to as salesperson. So that's actually an Eloqua system field. And generally speaking, that field is populated with the first name and last name of the CRM user who owns the contact. And in this case, it's Adrian Jones. Adrian, and then what we've done, and this actually comes from CRM user data, we pull this information into Eloqua with a mobile and, importantly, an email address. So what I've got here sitting on my contact in Eloqua, so here I am, just a regular contact sitting in the database. I have salesperson email address. Now, let me show you why that's important. So here we are. Here's the user group registration form. And you'll notice that we have a field merge here. So just as you would use a field merge to display the person's name to a customer, so if we go up the top of the page, we can see, first name, email address, etc. This would display the contacts information. However, down here, the email address we're after is the CRM user, so the salesperson, typically. So then what I'm able to do is under notification settings, I can actually choose, instead of just always send to a same email address, I don't want to notify just one person of everything. I'd rather just let the person who owns the relationship know about that particular person's registration. I can set it to use the value of a form field to select the email address. The form field in question is called AU salesperson email. And you'll see these are all of the fields contained on the form, so including hidden fields as well. And so then doesn't matter who it is, whether it's Jason, whether it's Mariah, whether it's Adrian, doesn't matter which member of the team it is, that will become a dynamic field merge and will pull through the right information. And in this case, Adrian would be the person who would receive the notification email. So just another smart use of hidden fields with a few other bits and pieces in order to get the right information to the right salesperson, instead of it having to be passed on to sales ops who might forward it or forget about it, etc., and those sorts of things. Okay. All right, what I want to do here was just give you some examples of other ways to use forms that might be a little bit more complex. The reason I chose Ayers Rock for this image is when I saw the image and all the stars, I'm like, the complexity of the heavens. So that was my somewhat link between complex forms and complex galaxy that we can see in front of us. But yeah, beautiful shot of Ayers Rock in the Northern Territory there. Probably one of the more iconic images from Australia. So targeted subscription forms. Okay, so there are loads of ways that you can get people to subscribe to things, and they may opt in. That's one thing. Then from there, it's about trying to target and get them to really express their interests to you. And sometimes a targeted subscription form, instead of sending people off to the preference center where there might be loads of different things they can choose from, and that's cool. We all should have one. We have one and it's great. But sometimes you want to narrow the invitation to people to subscribe to something very specific. So if, for example, you're visiting marketingcube.com.au, and you might go to our resources tab, and under there you'll find events. You'll see a big red button in the banner and it says subscribe now and don't miss the next event. So when you reach, or when you click through on that particular page, you're then brought to an Eloqua landing page. And so what this does, it's going to pre-populate, and this one just focuses just specifically, very targeted on our event subscription. And so from our point of view, that event subscription is everything to do with webinars, face-to-face events. Often we're co-hosting or joining Oracle at different events. And so we like to share those invitations with customers as well, and get you along to some of those different events. And so this just keeps that whole process nice and tight. So just one suggestion on how you can make that look a little bit different. Let me show you in what that looks like in Eloqua. So if you're using email groups for your subscriptions, many people do, not everybody does, but many people do, then you could look at something like this. So this is the form, all the right questions, etc. This is the one we were just looking at. Under the processing steps, it's this particular processing step, which is to no, it's not. Where is it? Down here. Email group, subscribe or unsubscribe. So as a result of somebody submitting this particular form, the whole purpose of this form is to have them subscribe to events. So you'll see here that these are all the different email groups that we have. In this case, we're getting them to subscribe, and you can see that you've got the option to do both. So depending on the purpose of the form and how people get there, but in this case, I want them to subscribe. And so that will then mean that they're added to that email group and they're all ready to go. So next time it comes to doing an event, then you can go to your segments. And under segments, we've got an event subscribers segment ready to go, already built. And here I'm using the filter called subscribe to groups. And there it is right there. So again, there's that list of email groups. In this case, it's events as of now, and off we go. So that's my starting point. So if it's a face-to-face event, what I would probably then do is add a filter here for, you know, people who are just based in Victoria, if we're doing an event in Melbourne or maybe in Auckland. So I'll just add a few more filters to it to tailor it. If it's a webinar, of course, well, that, you know, anybody can come to a webinar. So we can probably just leave it as is. But that's one way that you can have a far more targeted experience and drive people to look at something quite specific. Now, the other one that I wanted to show you is the notion of hardwiring a form with a CRM campaign ID. So this one can be really helpful, and it can be done in a couple of different ways. We had the question, I think it was earlier from Jared, was asking to either use a hidden field or to use a form processing step to hardwire a value into the response that's captured. So you really can do either. In the context of attribution, the campaign ID can be really valuable. For Salesforce customers, Salesforce CRM customers using Eloqua, the integration between your campaign object, specifically within Salesforce and to Eloqua, is quite tight. So there's a lot of really good information that can flow backwards and forwards. So things like the campaign ID, you've also got the function on the campaign canvas where you can associate a campaign member status to an individual as they move through a campaign. But quite simply, all you would be doing is back to forms. And so with the website subscription events form, if I wanted to create a campaign within the CRM that had just information about this particular form and all the bits and pieces that go with it, what I could do is simply come to the hidden field area, double click, there's my hidden field. I probably want to give it a smart name. So things like campaign ID. And then what you would do is you would add it as a static value. And campaign IDs are usually very long and hard to identify, but whatever it might be. And so then the fact that this is not a field merge, it's actually just now hardwired in. So every single person that submits this particular form would have that campaign ID attached to them. And it would be under processing steps under here, where you would then map that information to, I think this is a generic field, I think for most people, yeah. So last FSDC campaign ID. And so that will update the contact and through integration will flow back into the CRM, for example. So that's one way that you can manage to do that. Now, depending on the CRM platform that you're using, if it's not Salesforce, there are other options to help capture that from an attribution point of view. If you've got questions, please let us know and we can help you with that process. You don't want to be spitting things out into Excel and trying to do things manually, you know, some data from the CRM, some data from Eloqua and doing, you know, crazy things in Excel. The more we can automate it, if the attribution is something that's critical for you, then absolutely have a chat and we can walk you through that in a bit more detail. All righty, let's quickly jump in. We've got a few minutes, as in literally 2, before we finish off here. Okay, 21A release highlight. So some of you may have seen this information buried in top liners. It's in the Eloqua Insiders group is where you'll find the information. This is one I've been waiting for, is the ability to now do folder archiving for emails and forms. Up until, well, as of today, but effective middle of February, instead of just having to archive each individual form or email, you can now take an entire folder and archive that entire exercise. Remembering the nice thing about archiving is that it removes the forms or emails from any search results. So if you're looking for something, it's not going to show up in the search results, which just means, especially for those of you who have been using Eloqua for many years, there's going to be loads of different forms, historical forms, etc., in there that are absolutely irrelevant to what you're trying to do today. And so that archiving feature is really cool. Keeping in mind also, don't be alarmed if you do have a form or an email sitting in archive for whatever reason, and they happen to be in a current live campaign, they will still continue to function. So don't fear from that point of view. But you'll find lots of information in the Help Center on that one, just to answer some of the more common questions you might have. The controlling form visibility. So this is along the lines of your ability to control a landing page's visibility, same sort of thing, right? Now, we've also heard that there is potentially something else coming along with the controlling form visibility, which is to help with spam control or spam protection. And it will actually be called, I think it's referred to as the spam protection function. I don't have a lot more to share with you at this point, but as soon as we get some information, we'll try and get that out to you. Obviously, by the time we meet at the end of February, all of these things will hopefully be available to us, and we can take you through those in a little bit more detail. From a cosmetic point of view, the Redwood Styling, the new Oracle rebranding is slowly making its way through the application as well. Don't know about you, I kind of like it. I like it. It's a bit fresh and different. It's kind of understated. It's not in your face. I don't feel like a 3-year-old with cartoons. So it's nice and elegant to look at, soft on the eyes. So we'll see Eloqua dashboards available in the new styling as well. And I suppose they'll work their way through the editors over the rest of this year. So that information. Then there are updates to the Salesforce integration app, which seem to be happening pretty much every release. There are no more details beyond the bullet point, I'm afraid. So I'm not sure specifically what that is, but again, probably by the end of next month, we'll be able to share some of those with you. The Infinity Action Center feeder is getting a little bit more activity, and also the new fatigue dashboard. So please keep in mind that those last 2 bullet points do require an Infinity subscription. And the final one, the fatigue dashboard, so it's a new dashboard in Eloqua, is only generally available for those who have purchased the Advanced Intelligence add-on package. If you're interested in understanding more about that, you will find a little bit in the Help Center, or please pick up the phone or shoot an email, and Adrian and Jason would be happy to walk you through and explain a little bit more about that in a bit more detail. And as a general reminder, to ensure you're having the best possible experience with Eloqua, make sure you're using either Chrome 85 or Firefox 81. That will give you the best possible experience from an Eloqua point of view. Okay, well, I'm personally blown away. It's 12:02, so we've just gone over by 2 minutes. So that's not too bad, but happy to hang around if you do have questions. Thank you to Jared and Joel and Lisa and Sebastian and others who have asked questions today. Thank you so much for doing that. If you do have any other particular questions, I'll hang around here for a few minutes and happy to take those. But if not, have a wonderful day. Welcome to 2021, and let's get started, everybody. Take care. Cheers. Bye-bye. Okay. Sorry, guys. I can see there's a couple of questions here. Yulia, hi, Derek. We use one form to download for all our reports across the website. I'd like to create a thank you for downloading email with a link to the file. Is there a way to automatically add a link to a relevant report PDF? Hi, Yulia. Yeah, sure. So we call that one form to rule them all. And yes, when you've potentially got lots and lots and lots of different reports for people to access, having lots and lots and lots of forms is not always the best solution. So there is a way to do that. Personally, I would have to direct you to our support team to help you with that. It's reasonably complex, but once it's set up, it's fine. And then it's likely that you would obviously add probably new reports to the website. We have, for instance, customers in financial services who are distributing different types of reports, and those reports can change on a monthly basis, financial market reports, etc. Now, they don't create a brand new form every single time. I think maybe if Jason can have a chat with Yulia, we can connect you with the support team, at least give you an idea of what that can look like, and how you can automate that a little bit better, which will be helpful, I'm sure. And then Cameron, have you heard any news? Read the ETA of Oracle's new native Zoom integration. I haven't, Cameron. It seems to have the last, and I actually got a very candid response from one of the Oracle support team, just in a service request that we raised. They apparently hit a legal glitch. I don't know what the legal glitch was, Cameron, but no, I haven't heard anything further. I was specifically hunting for today's session, but it's still no mention of it. I'll keep hunting because we're a Zoom customer. And I noticed today, actually, purely by chance, I think it was 63% of people on the call today are using Zoom as well. So a lot of that. And then Joel, thank you for hanging around, guys. If you create a campaign in Eloqua, which then creates the campaign in Salesforce, do you have to manually add the campaign ID to the form, or is there a way to have it auto-populate when associated to the Eloqua campaign? Okay, so if you've got the campaign ID, and this is how we do it, Joel, every single campaign that we have, every canvas that we have in Eloqua, well, yeah, nearly every single one would have the CRM, in this case, Salesforce campaign ID stamped onto that particular canvas. So that for us means that when we look in the CRM and we look at the campaign and we look at the campaign members, they're all there. And that association is largely created using the campaign canvas. Sometimes though, the benefit of using the form is where, because remember, you don't have to have a campaign canvas to run a campaign, so to speak, in Eloqua. You might have just random landing pages with subscription details. There's no campaign canvas that is being used necessarily. It's just a landing page with a form that you've got sitting out there on the website, etc. So that's when you need to include the campaign ID within the form in order to have that association happen. And then you'll have a program in your form processing steps that would push the connection through to your CRM, in this case, Salesforce, and the campaign is associated that way. But because 99% of what we do is on the canvas, that's pretty much where we focus with the campaign ID. Hopefully that answers your question. If not, come back to us, shoot us an email, and happy to explore that in a bit more detail with you. And you're welcome, Joel. Thanks so much for joining us today. All right, guys, I think that might cover everybody, as long as I haven't missed anything. All right, folks, have a wonderful day, and we'll see you next month. Take care. Bye-bye.